Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we complete our 5-day program on conscious leadership and how we, wherever we are and whatever we're doing, animate the superpower that all of us know we have, but under current world conditions with all the stresses and tumult surrounding us, it's very hard at times to know how to activate it in a way that is constructive. As I've been thinking about all the extraordinary perspectives that have been shared and the very deep wisdom, there has arisen in me as I was preparing for this final session, two images that I would like to offer for our collective contemplation. And that is first the image of hospicing. It feels to me that conscious leadership in our time has a fundamental accountability to hospice that which is being destroyed, that which is passing away, that which is anachronistic, and that which no longer serves. And simultaneously, sort of on the other side of the coin, we're also called upon to be midwives, because I think it's clear to all of us that that is the fundamental characteristic of our time, the simultaneity of death and birth, the simultaneity of fatigue, stress, isolation, aggression, with vision and exuberance and inspiration, innovation, and novelty. All these aspects are clashing. All of them are coming together. And as we've noted a number of times on Humanity Rising, we're in a world in which things are getting worse and worse, better and better, faster and faster. And so the conscious leader is someone who holds these contradictions within the container of his or her own psyche. And I think, as I've been reflecting on it, embodies a disposition of mind that is characterized by beginner's mind, by unknowing. We don't know how the old actually is going to meet its full demise. We don't know actually how the new is going to take shape in the fulcrum and the fires of the burning of the old. And therefore, the conscious leader, as I'm coming to understand it through these discussions, needs to have a deep humility in understanding that one is holding without knowing outcome, and therefore the heart fills with compassion to both those institutions and ideologies that are passing away and those visions that are being actualized as the future unfolds. So those are the comments that I would like to offer as we begin our closing session. And I would like to now turn it over to Tom Eddington, who is the convener of this program. We have most of the people who've been present during the week joining us today. So we're looking forward to a very full and robust discussion. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. It's I too have struggled with how to summarize the experience of this week. And as we were discussing yesterday, the return of from the what we're calling the human journey. How does one make sense of it? We've been transformed by the journey into a world anew. We're seeing the world with a new set of eyes. And how do we make sense of and orient ourselves? And there are a couple of pieces that show up for me building off of what you were sharing. So one is very much the embracing of non-duality. And it's something that's hard for us as human beings. How do we hold this reality of 127,000 years of human history on the planet? And now we're at this last year, the hottest year on record. And there's nothing that's been done that's going to make 2024 anything other than a record again, and 2025 and 2026 and 2027 and 2028, et cetera. And yet there are things that we know can be done. And so very much like as we were talking about this week, the caterpillar in the chrysalis eating those imaginal cells that want to become the butterfly, violently trying to keep its way of being in the world. And yet there's this evolutionary impulse that will enable that butterfly to emerge. It's very much where we are. And how do we as conscious leaders, how do we be with that? And so that will be part of our conversation today. It's just on a very practical level. We're being all the time in our doing. And the question is, are we consciously being who we want to be? Are we showing up in the way that we want to be showing up in the doing that our lives require us to do? And so that's I think part of the inquiry we want to be in today in the conversation is, what does it mean to be a conscious leader in the world today? Who are some exemplars? I mean, certainly we can look at someone like the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. She hit the world stage because of who she was being as a conscious leader and leading their country through the COVID-19 shutdown and so many of the other challenges of their country. And then she continued to be a conscious leader and stepping down as a leader of the country. And that's something we don't see most leaders doing around the world, relinquishing their power. And so that's my invitation for not only those of you joining us today on the panel, and thank you all for coming back, but also for our viewers and those who are active in the chat. We want to invite your questions. We want to bring you into the conversation today. How is it that we need to be in this world that is feeling so unstable? How do we, to use Jim's metaphor aptly, how do we hospice out the old, and how do we midwife in the new that's emerging, and doing it in a way that is honoring of the past, that's honoring of the future, and all of the uncertainty. So I'll turn it over to you, Shawne. Welcome you into the conversation, then we'll bring our panel in.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jim. Welcome, everyone. Obviously, I really want to welcome back Karen, Wilhelm Buckley, Carol Pearson, Juliet Rohde-Brown, Heather Shea, and Alan Briskin to our conversation today. We're sorry, Jude Caravan and Richard Olivier can't join us today, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have a rousing conversation. And I feel that Tom pretty much set the stage for today, but I would like to invite us to have a group centering moment. I know Jim used to do those regularly, and I haven't noticed that we've been doing them. So if I could just maybe for 35, 40 seconds or so, I'll lead us in and bring us out if everyone's agreeable to that. I think centering together in a moment of reflection and quiet is really an element of being that definitely helps us in our intention for today. So I invite you to close your eyes and get comfortable in your chair or wherever you are. Deep breath in, slow exhale, and I will stop speaking for about 30 seconds or so, and then I'll bring us out in a moment or two. I invite you to slowly come back into the room. If I let you go much longer, we'd connect in an hour or two after a good meditation. So I'll turn it back over to you, Tom, and open up the room to our wonderful panelists.
Yeah, well, thank you, Shawne. As always, it's just been so much fun to be producing this week together. Thank you for all your gifts and who you are. I would just like to invite Juliet and Carol and Karen and Heather and Alan and Jim, if you want to be with us as well. Please join us on the screen. And I think what I'd like to start with is if each of you could just share a bit about what this week was like for you, any wisdom that you harvested, and also whatever is alive for you in this moment. Just share it as we kick off today's program. And we can do it popcorn style, so whoever's moved to speak first, please. Just take your device off mute and share.
I can go ahead and start. I haven't talked much this morning yet. I woke this morning continuing to really reflect on how conscious leadership is such a journey, that it is not a state we reach. And that when we choose the next challenge or we take on the next big commitment, how we discover the ways we're not conscious. We discover the leadership we're capable of. We discover the ways and how important it is that we're paying attention to the ways we are, however we define it, conscious, the ways we're aware and awake, the ways we are living in connection with the human race and with all life on Earth and beyond. Yeah. So that's my reflections of the morning.
Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you for bringing your voice into the space.
The word that is coming up for me is bearing, like bearing a pregnancy, bearing a birth, and in hospice, bearing the pain of the other and the pain of self, to be there with the dying process and with the suffering of another and the heartbreak, to acknowledge the passing of someone, something we have held dear or gotten used to or has been the known world. And so the word that's coming up for me is being vulnerable to that, and also staying open, as Jim suggested, with beginner's mind for the not known. So it's paradoxical. But the word that kept showing up for me this morning so far is bearing, like bearing, holding and bearing.
Um, one of the things that came up for me is as a, a person of my age, and what is calling me now, and it appears to be being the witch on the edge of Washington, D.C., where my family, I have two sons that work for the government in wonderful programs, and a daughter who teaches public policy. And so I'm very much engaged in what our government can do, and appreciating very much what our government does do. But so part of it was that, and that my other role is to keep throwing out magical books, talk less, and write more. The other thing that came up for me is wonderful learnings from so many of you. When I was thinking about the corporate world, and I thought there are people here who are doing that work, are doing that work. And that's where the money is. And right now we need money for all this stuff. And like the climate, and gratefulness, and hearing the wonderful processes. I was like thinking, because I was thinking back on the many years I was leading organizations, and particularly in higher education, and even in the Jungian world. And that when I was most successful, it was because I did that practice of staying in, taking time to have a connection with everybody I was with individuals, but also with groups. And then the times that I didn't, and where I failed. And I just, and the way that whenever we were getting too heady, one or the other of us, not me actually, but one of the others of us would bring us back to the heart and to our souls. I mean, it's been amazing. I'm just full of admiration for this group, and aware of how much you didn't even get to say that you also know.
Thank you. And thank you for an extraordinary week. As we're looking at today, I do go back to the whole journey, and looking at, as we're talking about hospice, we're talking about what next. It's truly following the yellow brick road. What's next? Who knew what was down? Who knew what was coming? Who knew what was behind the trees and the witches, and what Oz would bring? But I think we're there now. And looking out the future, I really want to respect the learning. And as we're looking at the future, we often forget history, and we often forget our own history. And to have the gratitude, doing more, very grateful for all my time in the corporate world, and I still work there. And yet more of my time now is with animals, as I mentioned. And I spend time with animals in transition, and looking at and celebrating their lives. And for those of us who have had people pass and been around it, it's celebrating the life, celebrating the learning. And I encourage people more to celebrate the learning of what we learned. And as we're looking at the potential of what we don't know, to be mindful of all we do know. I just think that's so important. And also, be mindful of what's dying off and what's coming in. The question came up, who are important people? And one of the many, many important people is, I have 4 daughters. I have daughters and son. I have children, and we have children. Those are the important people, the next generation, and what they're doing. and bringing them up and teaching them well, and also really looking globally as we look at the younger men and women coming forward, particularly the diversity in the world. They're important. So there's new ideas, there's new thoughts, there's new cultures, there's new ways, there's new technology. So we can pick out, the one and two, and I think it's important to pick out the many who are the collective future for us.
Mhm.
You, Heather. I guess I was reflecting as I was listening to everyone of the audience who's been coming this week. And the words that came to me is one, monitor your own intake of despair, that there's much going on right now. And Jim, earlier talked about, he started with climate change and recognized it as an assault on our bodies that we have to process. And we really are in a period of great turmoil. As Desmond Tutu said, pain is pain. You can't just sort of wish that away. But you have to place it in a larger context. And so how we process the despair. I recently took in June 13 peace ambassadors in Oswiecim, Poland, that included a trip to Auschwitz. And we called it the inner journey through Auschwitz. And, what I practiced and learned is that to do this, we had to just slow ourselves down, for the body to process this horror. You can't do it in your mind, and you can't do it, by wishing that there's some elixir that we could all just drink and everything will be fine. Which leads to the second part, which is for each of us to think about our role in social transformation. I don't look that much at the public leaders. Public leaders are just expressions of the collective. And if the collective is in jeopardy, the leaders will reflect that. And they'll be on a continuum. They won't all be good or bad, but there'll be some kind of reflection of the collective. And so what role do we play in social transformation? One of my colleagues, Adam Kahane, is working on a book titled Everyday Practices of Social Transformers. We are the leaders that we need to look at. And that could be as basic as how we are with our families. I mean, Carol had this wonderful story about her home becoming a shelter for these different people. And Karen gave a definition of leadership that had directly to do with what we do with each other. So badgering each other about how horrible things are is fun, but there's limits to that kind of fun. I tease people. I said, what don't you understand about the end of the human species? And that really takes a lot of inner work, a lot of body processing, that we're not going to save the world today or tomorrow. And by noticing each other and seeing each other and noticing what we're not noticing, begins to sort of be a transformational process. So that's what I was hoping people will start to receive from the time we've spent together this week.
Jim, anything? Thank you, Alan. Jim, anything more you want to add at this time?
Well, what was just coming up for me with Alan's comments was something, Karen, you referred to from Hazel Henderson, that, as bad as it may seem, we actually don't know enough to be pessimistic. And, ever since I heard that from Hazel, I was arrested that that's actually very true. So that the beginner's mind is not only about the future or the cosmos, it's about this attitude that we so easily develop in ourselves toward pessimism and despair. So I want to bring in Hazel, who's one of the great leaders of our time, one of the most conscious, leaders that I think any of us have have known in our generation. And thank you for bringing that in, Karen.
Maybe building off of what Jim just shared and what many of you shared. Last year, I did a program on Humanity Rising, and one of the panelists was Dr. Sylvia Earle, just an icon in
She's
oceanography. And one of the questions I asked her was, "What brings you hope?" And her response was, "We finally know. We have the data. We have the information." And that gives her tremendous hope in the possibilities of the future, that we now have the data and the information. And Dr. Jane Goodall was on the program last year as well. And I asked her the same question. And she said it's the children, her Roots and Shoots program, and the youth that are involved in her Roots and Shoots programs. And so, I think about what you shared yesterday, Karen, of minor change, major change, and transformational change. And that's where we are as a species. And we have enough evidence now that we know we're going through transformational change. And we know how to deal with transformational change. There's been enough literature, there's been enough research, there's been enough evidence and information about how does one as an individual, how does one as a collective go through transformational change. It's not easy. It's very, very painful, to your comment, Ellen. And there's a tremendous amount of suffering, but we do know how to do it. And so it's that embracing of, so this is where we are. This is where what we're going through. We don't know what's on the other side, but we know how to stay sane, mostly. We know how to support each other, mostly. And to reference the Dalai Lama, the next Buddha will be the Sangha. We're seeing evidence of that all over the world, that it's our collective ability to support each other that will get us through, as hard and as easy as that is. And it is that getting out of our skull brain and getting into a full body experience of what we're going through, the delight, the joy, and the suffering all in one. Shawne, what's there for you in this moment?
Thanks, Tom. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge everybody, because it's quite clear we have conscious leaders here. Because one of the, I believe, attributes is that we don't interrupt each other. We pause when someone has finished speaking and give that speaker a moment. What they have said, we can embrace and be with what they have said without, jumping in with, you understand what I'm saying. So I want to acknowledge you, because I think that is definitely an attribute of a conscious leader. And I want to acknowledge you all. Two things came up for me. One is somewhat the notion, and in my own life, between when we talked about intention. And sometimes I feel with this also uncertainty, that I have this imagery that I'm at the helm of a sailboat. And if any of you are sailors, you'll relate to this when you are out on the seas or wherever you are. And you have an intention, you have a goal, you have an outcome in mind, you want to get to there. And yet there's the currents and there's the winds. And if you're watching that telltale and you are at the helm, and of course, depending on the size of the boat too, you are so focused on watching that there's a certain, for me anyway, and this is one of my heart math techniques when I fall into this imagery, is that there's so much focus that you become one with the boat, you become one with the water, you become one with the wind. in following that tacking, if you will. And yet at the same time in my life, there's this surrender to not being attached to the outcome. And I'll bring in, this is written in so many different wisdom traditions, but the Gita comes to mind, which is such a brilliant work where we have a dharma, and yet what does it look like to not be attached to the outcome? So there's this paradox in my life, and I assert that this is true for many others, that we have an intention, we want to get there, but the journey is, you know, like Heather was saying, the yellow brick road is going over here, and then there's that, and then there's going over, and so on. And what does it feel like to surrender to, maybe, as I said earlier in the week, is the outcome source, or what have you, have a cooler notion in mind for Shawne than what Shawne can possibly think of? And can I surrender to that? And then the second thing, and this always chokes me up, so forgive me, because I'm a chokey uppy kind of person. When I reflect on our cosmos and that of our planet, this itty bitty speck, right? And over the hundreds of thousands of years that we have evolved to the fact that we're this self-reflective conscious species, and all the things that we're discovering in science and physics now. And fast forward that the unique you, everyone here, everyone is this unique gift of a life that's a blip, right? Blip. All the random eggs and sperms and 20th century, that we're all here. And I sometimes, this is the choke here, but how come I don't get up in the morning and get on my knees in gratitude that I get to have this blip? Heather gets it, this blip of a gift. And that brings me back to sharing our gifts. And sharing how extraordinarily cool and wonderful and fantastic to have this moment, this present moment, to connect with every single one of you. It, to me, is like, I can hardly talk in terms of, the love and gratitude for the gift. So let's share our gifts.
Yeah, thank you, Shawne. And thanks for bringing the Gita into the conversation. I'm always taken back to S. Warren's English translation of the Gita. In the introduction, he talks about the opportunity of life. The opportunity of life is to serve, to give, and to love. I would add there's a fourth, which is to create. But that's it. It's so simple. But that's the opportunity for each of us to be alive, is to serve, be of service to other, to give our gifts, and to love. And if we can, to your comment, if we can get on our knees each morning and to be thankful that we woke up, to make that commitment, how am I going to serve today? What am I going to give today? And how do I, in every moment of my waking moments of this day, love everything, love everyone?
And that intentional choice, who am I going to be today? Back to that being to inform our doing.
Yep.
I
left our
noticed.
panel speechless, Shawne.
No. Deep reflection. Tom, I noticed that I'm still with something that I think I just heard you say, which is that we know how to do transformation. Have I experienced personal transformation? Yes. Have I read extensively about the principles of transformation? Yes. Do I hold clients over many, many years as we work together within that potential of transformation as it's in their nature to do? Do I create a cauldron? Do I turn up the heat? Do I hold their hand as they take that first step? Do I keep finding the steadiness as they're in the transition, initiation of the white water? One client, I even drew a line on the floor because she had been in the whitewater so long, but she was afraid to step across the threshold into whatever this new was going to be because she didn't know. She only had clues. And I finally got up and put a line on the floor, and we stood there together because I recognized that we don't cross a threshold alone very easily. Not since we were teenagers, and we kind of crossed it by putting our elbows back and pushing everybody out of the way. As adults, I think we best cross the threshold together, and into the arms, hopefully, of those who are waiting for us there. But I keep coming back to that the patterns and grooves, the ways in which I have come to understand transformation, which I've studied now for 45 years, has led me to actually see how much I don't know, rather than how much I do know. What I do know is that transformation is a natural process. And what I know is that it doesn't meet my criteria for nice always. What I do know is it's real. And what I do know is that I can find my stability in the middle of it. Again and again and again and again and again. But all the way through, I think that it's a job. It's a job. And one year I did something really foolish, I guess. I'm a highly intentional human being. And one year I set the intention that I would see all of my illusions. It was one of the hardest years of my life.
And one of the biggest illusions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So a hummingbird is just outside my window dancing, saying hello to everybody, all the participants that are in the chat and listening now in real time and after. And yeah. So I think that final piece I wanted to say on that is, as I work with clients in their organizations, what I see is that as they come to recognize their connectedness with the world, as they come to take that deep breath out of isolation, out of the need to be the hero, into the recognition that there is a collective that they are part of, both human and earth, that there is an evolutionary process that we are part of, and we have a choice to be conscious leaders as part of that evolutionary process, and to go out and greet the dawn each morning and stand with the trees and join them in that process. And then naturally those companies become green business. Naturally they reach out and figure out B Corp, and they become a B Corp, and they join the B Corp community, and naturally they articulate a mission that is central to what's theirs to do. And naturally, they begin to have more influence, and they begin to raise the questions that others aren't raising. And they begin to provide a different level of service, both individually and as a firm, which I think, again, I'm going to say that whole level of consciousness around collective acting is the challenge of our times. And so I think we can each do what is ours to do. And some of us to be out on the front line, the way you do that, Jim, so brilliantly, and bring the fire and are willing to stand there. And others of us are making no less of a difference, doing the work that we're doing in the way that's ours to do. Yeah. So I just really trust everybody here is doing what's theirs to do, and everybody that's participating and not speaking on the panel here today. Yeah. I'm really glad to be here with you all.
Thank you. I love the term transformer. And Jim, when we were speaking this morning, we were talking about hospicing and the endings, and we're also talking about midwifing. And when I look back at my career, it has been as a transformer. And when I think of a transformer and we look at archetypally, you come in and go, oh, this needs to change. And you twist up yourself and everybody else and everything else. And, ta-da, the organization has shifted and you've introduced new products and, all sorts of wonderful things have happened. And then you go, well, did that really work? And I think it's the transformer, the conscious leader has gone from, and traditionally, if we look at leadership, the hero, the CEO, and it's still, alive and well in many countries and organizations and things of, I will be the transformer and transform things. And it's a collective. Oh, yes. And I'll include people and others. That's shifting. And I love the term midwifing, because midwifing, you are helping, you're participating in a birth, and you're participating in individual birth, but you're participating in a collective birth. And I think it's sort of an interesting transformation, pardon the term, from transforming and hero and changing and being the one or one of the leadership team that makes all this wonderful stuff happen, to midwifing possibilities. And I think that's, right now when I'm thinking about it, the work that we're doing around climate, it isn't going to be one hero that comes in and changes. It's going to be a midwifing, as we're seeing across the world, all the initiatives around changing climate. So it is the becoming and the rebirthing, as well as we maybe look at some of the archetypal words that we used.
Carol, Juliet, anything that's there for you in the moment?
Yes, I have something that I think fits in where we are in the conversation. Archetypalist that I am, it's birthing, is creation, and hospice is destruction, really, but being with the process. And a wise woman years ago noted that I was in my leading, I was very conscious of seeing the new, the good and the good potential, and I still focus on that a whole lot. But I was unconscious of my own destroyer. I mean, it comes up, and I had an image of when I apply for jobs as leadership, I come across as being really almost, caregiver and lover and ruler and whatever. And I should have had a t-shirt where I opened up my proper jacket and it said, "Don't hire me if you don't want change." Well, what she did is she took me out in the forest and we just walked. And my job during that time was just to notice all the new growth, the little sprouts, and that there was as much decomposing as there was growing. And I got it. I really saw it. And recognizing, and one of the things that I'm trying to do as a discipline now is both seeing there's a lot of signs of rebirth going on. There's a lot of birth going on. But I tend to have judgment about the people who are taking that apart. I mean, you know, since I'm focusing right now on America and government and things like that, people are really liking to basically cripple our government and take it apart. But to I'm not for it. I don't vote for it. But I also recognize that unconsciously or consciously, that is part of the decomposing process. And that I can recognize it having some function, even as I don't want it. And why I don't want it, for sure, a lot of people want to tear apart our government, and what I think people don't recognize is that tearing things apart, decomposing, where you tear it apart out of a sense of it's not perfect, it's not good enough, there will be chaos. These are the structures of our country, structures of the world too. And if we don't do it with kindness and awareness, and in some way, we don't have much time, particularly on the climate change issue. But we still need to have a birth where we're not grabbing the baby out of the womb, unless we want to do that. But anyway, yeah. And so anyway, my sense here is, anyway, I've said everything I have to say, except the blessedness of all of it. That what I was learning from those of you who are reminding me about the processes, about stepping over the thresholds by remembering to connect up with everybody in every group, is that I could start when I pick up my news feed, blessing everybody, just having a blessing towards everybody, including the people I disagree with, including the people that scare me. So there.
Yes, I think, thank you for that, Carol, including those we disagree with, including those who are more aggressive with their opinions in this world and their sides, all the different sides. I don't know, I was just, as people were speaking and about climate change, I was thinking about Glenn Albrecht, who coined this term solastalgia. It's kind of a homesickness for home, but you're not, but you're home, you're where you lived, but it's not home anymore. So then where do we find home? And we have to then find it within ourselves somewhere. And when we can do that and work toward finding that home within ourselves, I think that then we show up differently in the world with others. I look at students, and you know, that's most of my life is spending time with the students and letting them be who they are, letting me be who I am with all my failures and joys and sadnesses, and just showing up and doing the best we can. But there is so much paradox in our lives. I sometimes do a meditation where I actually imagine myself passing away and the skin falling off, and you know, just to not be afraid of death, because death is inevitable. the physical concrete death, and then the death of all the little deaths along the way that make room for the births. And it's a continuous process. It never ends, does it? You know. But yesterday, or the other day, I mentioned a sculpture under the water. I think it's Jason DeCaires Taylor is the sculptor. And it's a young girl from Bahama, indigenous girl. It's a very large sculpture, and it's underneath the water. And she's going like this, like she's kind of holding up the world, but she's underwater. She's holding the water. And when I'm thinking of water, I'm thinking of feeling. I'm thinking of that like the feeling function, the feminine function. And I'm thinking again of the paradox of what we've done to this world, to the planet, but the hope, and that I believe the leaders are to come back to the indigenous ways of knowing, to the multiple ways of knowing. So many people are seeking plant medicines, seeking earth-based practices, and then they risk appropriating in a disrespectful way. But what is the call there? It's really to come back to our own deep knowing and remembrance. So I think the leaders are those, especially the young people, because they're going to be the ones leading the way, but those who are tapping back into that and not afraid to do so, and seeking that within themselves, and standing. Just a couple of days ago, somebody has a large farm in the San Ynez Valley and said she refuses to use any pesticides, and she went about planting new seeds just that morning. So there's somebody taking a stand when a lot of other people in the community are using pesticides. I mean, that's just a small gesture, but it's really great.
Gonna come in. I think there was a lot of filling out a very creative tension between Tom's earlier comment that we know a lot about transformation, and Karen, you saying as much as you learn about it, there's what you don't know, and that we've sort of been filling in the spaces in that tension. And I saw in the chat someone just saying transformation is simply the change of form. Its origins, its linguistic origins is transmorphic, cross the form of something. So if I redesign my bathroom, I'm in a transformational process. I'm physically transforming the bathroom. There was a point where the word took on a different meaning, particularly with the depth psychology and Jung, is it referred to an inner transformation. And so a lot of our assumptions about transformation immediately move toward that inner transformation. And there are different kinds of transformations, not only my bathroom, but there's personal and spiritual transformation. And Juliet's comments about the denial of death and the moving beyond the fear of death is such an important part of personal and spiritual transformation. If you're unconsciously fearful of death, it has all kinds of ramifications in how you deal with your world. Social transformation has certain kinds of complexities beyond the personal and personally spiritual. And that's also been very much part of our conversation. And in the realm of social transformation, we're always reacting to something and never fully understanding, what the outcome will be. And what I would add to the conversation of we know a lot about transformation, we know a lot we don't know, is the idea of mastery. I was listening to a person who's studying magicians, who do it for pay, in performances. And he says they generally don't feel respected, that people will come up to them and say, oh, I know how to do that trick. But you'd never go up to Yo-Yo Ma and say about his cello playing, oh yeah, I know how you do that. You just take the bow across the thing, because Yomoma is understood as having developed mastery. And I think there is different kinds of mastery in the social transformational space. None of us know how to do it exactly, because none of us know what the outcome will be from our efforts. But there is an attention to detail, to, what Carol was bringing forward, even those things that we object to, even those things we know might be dangerous, they're still part of the larger system. They're still playing some type of function. And can we address that in some way? I mean, the great social transformers for me, people like Mandela, not that he fixed South Africa, but he understood that people opposed his view, and it was through dialogue and respect and assertion. So he developed a certain mastery in an incredibly complex situation. So I think that my point here is that we look for mastery, not for any one thing alone, not for the vision, not for the this, not for the that, but who among us is, and how do we develop that mastery together? How do we keep learning from each other and being able to do what Karen's intent was? How can we keep finding what we're still, the illusions we're still functioning under? So I'm enjoying the weaving of this conversation and it's beginning to try to integrate it into myself.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And maybe I'll try and set us off in a sort of a building process for what's next. And so for me, I refer back to in the 1990s and early part of this century, Bill Bridges' work on change and transformation. And Bill, in his research, found that we as a species are hardwired for change. We love change. It's just the nature of who we are. It's part of our evolutionary impulse, but transition's everything that happens after that change moment in time. And it's that transition that we can be challenged by. And as Jude reminded us on Monday, that we have this evolutionary impulse that's arising in us to move from the me to the we. And so to your comment, Alan, how do we, the change has happened. We're in this transition phase, this evolutionary impulse to move from the me to the we, to this unity consciousness. And who are the exemplars out there? Who are the people who are being the conscious leaders that are being? What are they doing that are exemplars, that are role models, that are, and each of you, what are the practices that you're doing? What are the things that you're doing to help perpetuate this evolutionary impulse to move to the unity consciousness? What's there that's helping you? And for me, I often think about, it's a silly metaphor, but when we first learn to drive a car, our entire consciousness, our entire focus is staying within the speed limit, keeping the car between the lines, not hitting someone or something around us. And as we become more experienced car drivers, we are not only focused on staying within the speed limit, staying between the lines, paying attention, but we're thinking about where we're going, what we're going to buy in the store, or the meeting we're going to, or we're listening to the radio, or we're on the telephone. And so our consciousness is on driving the car. Our consciousness is also on our destination, or the radio, or the conversation, or other things. But there's a third level of consciousness that's paying attention to if our consciousness on the radio, or the conversation, or the meeting, or the whatever is inhibiting our ability to drive the car safely, that overriding consciousness will intervene. And so using that metaphorically, there is that overriding consciousness of this evolutionary impulse for us to move to unity consciousness. It's present in all of us. And so where is our attention from moment to moment? Is it in the conversations in the meetings? Is it keeping the car on the road, keeping pedestrians safe? And how do we move from those three levels of consciousness with ease, with the right priorities? What are the practices we can do throughout our day? When do we take retreats throughout the year to take that opportunity to think about how we've been spending our time, and can we do a reset?
I'd love to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to have an astounding answer to that. The one thing it does, I respond, and the answer is, you mentioned Bill Bridges, in his work, he talks about beginning, middles, and ends, and of course the transition being the most difficult. The name of his book, or one of his books, is Transitions. At the same point, one of the things I love about his work is that we're all having beginning, middles, and ends at the same time. And I love that idea. And sometimes I just want to go, okay, and when's the next, and when am I going to arrive? And when is it going to, when is it going to slow down? And you go, oh, here's another beginning, here's another ending, here's another middle. And he also says sometimes, we're kind of good at beginnings, we're not very good at endings. But that also is, somewhat problematic. And he also said we're all going through our beginning, middles, and ends at the same time and at different time frames than others. So it's working collectively, and we touched on that a little bit the first day of all this stuff that we're going through independently. And sort of one more part of the book or his work, is you're driving along and you're unconscious because you're thinking about your meeting and you're just driving along, but then, a car comes in front of you or something happens and all of a sudden you're awake again. So again, not having the answer per se, I think what's interesting is that everything we're talking about is a process, that it is a beginning, middle, of end. It's keeping on going. And it's not just the happily ever after. It's kind of, what can we do along the way? What are we doing now? What are we doing today? What are we doing this week? Recognizing that we think we're doing it and then something might change. So it's kind of pulling it all together. And again, from all our work, it's what was it we were talking about? Was it yesterday, the day before? Everything all together at the same time is kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, I'd like to bring in some realities that I'm dealing with here in Washington that I think pertain to a contradiction that I'm currently holding. Part of my task as we focus on the passage of this final piece of legislation that launches the UFO disclosure over the next 7 years into the global domain, is that the people with whom I'm working are both on the far right and the far left simultaneously. The strongest supporters of disclosure are actually people like Matt Gaetz. And when most people think of Matt Gaetz, they recoil because he's such an extreme MAGA alt-right Republican. He just took out Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House. And yet, we're interacting with his military liaison, legislative assistant, as well as the people in the office of AOC. And so part of, I think, leadership in our time is being able to embrace the full spectrum of perspectives and activities with allies that are coming together in a world in which the old forms no longer apply. So I think that's part of the creativity, Tom, that you were mentioning as an add-on to Eswaran. I think, in fact, I would say creativity in some ways has primacy at the moment because we're no longer in a situation where the center holds. So because the center doesn't hold anymore, the categories of discourse and value are no longer containing us in the way that they were. And I think that's one of the reasons for the escalating anxiety and ennui around the world. But also it's giving space to an extraordinary possibility of identity as we see it, the level of gender and sexuality, but also political activity. So that's one side. And then there's the other side that I want to bring in. My office is inside the federal enclave. If you think of the Lincoln Memorial, then the Washington Memorial, and then the Congress and the Supreme Court, I'm inside that. I'm right by the Supreme Court and across the street from the Capitol, and on the other side is the Hart Senate building. So I'm walking in the heart of American governance every single day. And over the last 2 weeks, there's been heavy police cordons. I went over to the Senate building yesterday to have lunch. I couldn't get in because Code Pink and the Palestinian groups and the Jewish groups that are calling for a ceasefire in the genocide that's happening in Gaza have been extremely active. They're infiltrating the Capitol. They went to Union Station. They're in some of the hearings. And if you saw the Senate hearings yesterday or day before yesterday, where Anthony Blinken was asking for another $10.4 billion for Israel, you'll see that behind him were all these people in the audience raising their hands that had been painted red for blood. So that's another aspect. It's one thing to hold the contradictions. And then there's another piece where you have to be part of the contradiction itself, in my view, where you have to take a stand and you have to say, this is wrong. And it is not about holding the whole. It's about taking a stand in a way, as Martin Luther King and Gandhi said, where you make people aware that there's even a contradiction in the first place. You know, as Martin Luther King said, that the purpose of civil disobedience is not to solve the problem. It's to wake people up to the fact that there is a problem, right? And that's what the ANC and Mandela, who was referenced, did so masterfully. And I noted in the chat, Bruce Robertson and others were saying that while we were having this conversation, the elephant in the room was this, what's happening in Gaza. And so I just want to have us expand our notion of conscious leadership to not only embrace the conscious inclusivity and open-heartedness and open-mindedness of consciousness, but also those times where consciousness has to close in on itself and take a stand in a way that directly challenges a great iniquity in the world. And I've just been experiencing that up close and personal, being in Washington at both ends of those spectrums on a daily basis, up to yesterday, when Code Pink did yet another action with more arrests around the government buildings. And I found myself talking to Matt Gaetz on the one side, and then standing with the protesters a few minutes later, and feeling that, as Plato says, which is another aspect, is that when we hold all these experiences, what happens, he says, is we engage in a process of the enlargement of the soul. As Whitehead said, Christ is crucified and the fairies dance. And that is the fulcrum of consciousness within which, if you can hold it, leadership even becomes possible in our time. So that would be something that I would reflect on.
I want to come in after you, Jim, because I think you're pointing to something that's really quite a takeaway, that we are part of the contradictions as well as recognizing the contradictions. And this is played out again and again. In the earlier years, Desmond Tutu would give speeches about we cannot be neutral at this point during the period of apartheid.
Totally.
It again makes us reflect on, Tom's provocation to look at the me-we unity consciousness, is that I think too many people think if everyone could think just like me, we could have unity consciousness. It doesn't work like that. And the piece I'll add, then Carol, I see you want to come in.
Apologies.
No. It reminded me of someone told me Dalai Lama said this. I can't confirm it because I didn't see it, but that someone asked from the audience, what would you do if someone came running at you with a knife? And the Dalai Lama, without hesitating, said, shoot him. And everyone broke out laughing, right? Because it's like, you don't expect the Dalai Lama to say that. And then he says, but shoot him in the leg so you could visit him in the hospital. And there's an element of wisdom in that, is, can you be in the contradictions? Can you hold your own? Can you stop the other when you feel that that's necessary, but still somehow hold on to the idea that we are still united, that there will be another place that we can come together. And that, to me, is a level of discipline and consciousness, especially when you're in the contradiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I need to say something. My whole body I'm crying. I mean, I care about the Palestinians too, but I also care about the Israelis. And I have an Israeli in my home, worried about his family, worried about the Palestinians too. I mean, and I think, what about Hamas in this? I personally think it may have been a mistake for Jews to go back in their Holy Land, because it was a holy land of a lot of Christians and Muslims as well. But they have been there, and I fear, and I'm not against Muslims. I'm against Hamas. I'm against Hamas. I understand that the Israelis have done things that could make them angry, but they are terrorists. And I don't think, what my fear is that I'm not wanting to take sides. I care about both sides, except for terrorists at this moment. And I fear that what people who are just really, really going after the Israelis as if Hamas had not done anything are basically part of what is triggering all the anti-Semitism that is emerging in the world. And, I have people I love that are, that are there. And a husband who's Jewish. And when he was growing up, he grew up with kids who with tattoos on their arms because they had been rescued from the camps. And I can't, my fear is that there's a vulnerability that I don't like the leadership of Israel right now. But my fear is that that taking a side in this particular case is as if it's just easy to have a ceasefire. Just easy to have a ceasefire when people are so frightened. So I think that's part of being in dialogue is to say, I can't go there. I'm against war in all of its manifestations, but there are times when I think the result would be the wiping out of Israel. And with great respect, Jim, for you.
Yeah, I didn't mean to derail the conversation, but just exemplify through what's happening around me here in Washington, some of the aspects of leadership. I think the caution I would offer is labeling Hamas terrorists and the Israelis not, because I think there's a difference between state terrorism and non-state terrorism. Mm-hmm. If you look at what Hamas did to Israel on a balance between that and what Israel is now doing to the Palestinian people, you have a massive asymmetry in the death rates and in the carnage that is taking place. So I think from my point of view, we need to be really careful about the labels that we use, because most of the rest of the world considers Hamas the Mujahideen, and the labeling that we use so freely and casually in North America and Europe as a small part of the globe motivates us to be able to legitimate violence at extraordinary levels. We've done it in Ukraine. We're doing it with China. We did it with Iraq. We did it with Afghanistan. So I would just urge all of us to be very cautious about who you call terrorists, and to be able to hold that in the Palestinian case, it was Israel that actually helped create Hamas and foster Hamas, and Hamas has represented the Palestinian people in a situation of occupation that has been condemned by virtually every country in the world for decades, and out of which resistance takes place. That's what happened in South Africa. It's important for us to remember that the ANC and Nelson Mandela used violence because they said that the situation was so onerous in that apartheid regime that nonviolence was not an instrument that they could use. And I often offer Gandhi and Mandela that sometimes nonviolence is the change and the leadership that we need in a situation in which Gandhi found himself. And sometimes violent resistance is also legitimate, as Mandela and the ANC also exemplified. And so I would appreciate what you're saying, but I would just be careful at who we're labeling terrorists, because terrorism is a matter of perspective. It's not a matter of fact. And if we define terrorism as killing civilians, then look at what's happening right now in Gaza. And again, I don't want to take the conversation to a place that's overtly political, but this is what's happening on the streets all over the world right now. This is what Bruce called the elephant in the room as we speak about conscious leadership. And we just need to acknowledge that, whatever our position is.
Now, let me say quickly, I was just saying what I'm thinking. I'm not saying I'm right, nor am I meaning to shift the conversation.
Let me tell you what I appreciate.
Good.
I think that Tom, again, offered something provocative by saying that there's a transformation at foot going from me to we in unity consciousness. And what followed, and what I experience often, is that when people talk about their immediate situation and their understanding of what's happening in the world, it's very hard to see the horizon of the me to the we. And I think that's a good thing. I think we have to have these kinds of real conversations of what shows up in our bodies, what shows up in our tears, how we think about that, how we respond, which I thought was quite, remarkable in some ways, your response of what is in other contexts to understand this. Just because of my sense of humor, I've never been a big fan of Nazis, for example. I know that about myself. I also know that there's cycles of victim and perpetrators. That is a constant issue. If we want to look toward the horizon of the me to the we, to the unity consciousness, just as we have to face questions of death and mortality, we have to face questions of the perpetual cycle of victim and perpetrators. It was Zionist groups that were once called terrorists before the birth of Israel. So we can change chairs, but we're not changing the larger context. And to me, that's part of the discipline of keeping our eyes on that horizon and seeing what's happening in the moment as part of this birthing process. And it's not often pleasant. And there are times we have to live inside the contradictions. So I just want to acknowledge that I think that we're doing a service for people by illustrating, by demonstrating that these larger questions of unity consciousness are going to sort of fall prey to the immediate situations that we're living in. And from my own point, we don't have an elephant in the room that's Gaza. We have lots of elephants in the room. We have Ukraine, we have climate change, we got Sudan, we got, and when all the elephants get in the room, there's not enough room for people like us, that we have to recognize what's taking up space and how we're going to deepen the conversation and breathe into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alan. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Jim. And Alan, I'm appreciating the reference to the elephants. There's not one. There are many, many. I was in a meeting with a colleague recently who mentioned looking at the CDC data here in the US and looking and analyzing the data, that if you look at young African-American males who die of gunshot wounds, 60% of them die from self-inflicted wounds. that their sense of hopefulness, their sense of a future, their sense of how to overcome the structural racial biases built into our culture drives them to a point of suicide. There are so many elephants in the room. And so I'll, as we're coming up to the close of the program, I would just invite each of you once again, whether it's who are some exemplars, who are some people that you hold up as helping you on your path towards becoming more of a conscious leader. What are some practices that you do that we can just leave our audience with as we close out the program? And for me, I just, I heavily influenced by a mentor and dear friend of mine, John Renish, who passed away a few years ago. John called himself a scholar of conscious leadership, knowing there is no definition, there's no destination, and that we're all on this journey. So I very much hold myself as somebody that's on the journey of becoming a conscious leader. And so I'll invite each of you once again to share some exemplars, some folks that help guide you on your path, or some practices that help you on your journey. Shawne, why don't I start with you?
Oh gosh, okay. As some of you know, about 2 years ago, I published a book called Transcendental Leadership. And the subtitle is Ageless Principles and Practices for Leading in a Time of Awakening. And there's a chapter 4 in there that is called Portals to Awakening, something like that. And this winter, I'm going to be taking that chapter and making that into a small book, because I believe, and this is what I do, is it's you could call it spiritual practices that can only inform and contribute to Shawne's being to inform her doing. And I find that to be very bottom line in terms of being conscious leader, conscious individual. And the categories run, of course, from meditation we're all familiar with, to nature, movement, qigong, inspired writings, indigenous wisdom. There's 10 different kinds of overarching portals, I call them, in categories. And so basically what I am saying is, and in the book, I have interviews of about 20 to 25 individuals that I consider to have those traits and capacities that I call transcendental leadership. And Jim is one of the folks that's interviewed in the book. Thank you, Jim. And Heather as well, by the way. That's really where I come from in this conversation, are the practices that I encourage people to get some strength around, whatever aligns their sense of their inner self with greater good, serving the whole, a we mentality to serving, and an alignment to universal wisdom or source. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Shawne. Heather, would you mind going next?
Thank you. Well, first, I'd like to thank everyone for this week as we're wrapping up an extraordinary week, and I look forward to replaying some of the things along the way. And since we mentioned the elephants in the room, I'll come back to the elephants in the room and saying, as many of us know, as we were talking about the extinction of humanity, elephants are decreasing, and there's a real challenge with elephants decreasing. And yet at the same time, as many of you may have read, elephants now are they're dying for a number of reasons, climate being one, but also poaching. And there are now herds of elephants that are being born without tusks. And so nature herself, Mother Nature, Gaia, humanity, animal knowings have transformed this beautiful animal to coming up and being here in a new way. So it's an interesting journey that we're all going through, of that the horribleness has created a newness for the future of the elephants in the room.
Thank you, Heather. Carol?
Well, first, thank you, Jim, for responding the way you did to what I said, and Alan, putting it in perspective. And so I will say one thing about my building on Alan. Just since I work with story, part of my sense of story is we all end up playing all the roles in the story. And particularly when so many of us are playing the role of the victim, that we're asking to be in the role of perpetrators very soon, which has obviously happened for the Israelis. We have to play all the stories, and I think that's one of my practices, is to know what the story is, and if what part in that story am I playing, even when I don't like to see what that is. The other thing that just is going on with me is I've led with the academic and the psychological, but personally I've always been in the world of spirit, and that's what, and in some ways also, what are the ways that we can transform the world by transforming ourselves, and paying attention to those synchronicities of the personal transformation. And then synchronicity shows up. We don't, I do believe I don't have to make it all happen. So I guess, I start every day. I don't fall to my knees. I sit and meditate, and I bless the earth, and I connect with the earth, send my energy into the sky, and to the wisdom way beyond anything I would know. And I connect my energy with the critters and all the people, and then I ask for guidance, and in terms of how can I serve, and also how can I find joy in everything that's going on. So that's what I do.
Thank you, Carol. Karen?
I find I'm deep in reflection on the whole conversation. So a couple thoughts. One is appreciation for the wisdom of each of you and the wisdom in the chat. There's a tremendous amount of listening and searching and questioning and knowing and taking a stand and learning from that stand that we took, that I see in this particular collective. Practices, I like that theme. Mine is to walk out each morning that I get myself there. I realized it's not a practice of perfection, it's a practice of following what's right for that morning. I walk out to a particular place in our yard where I can see the sunrise. And if it's pouring rain, I do so in the bedroom where I can see the sunrise. And as my practice of connecting with the directions, with earth, with sky, and listening deeply inside my own body, and really making sure I'm inhabiting my full body. As those practices have evolved over the years, I've now really been challenged to also include a practice of receiving. I think that I have been sensitive enough that I haven't always wanted to be receiving what all is in the world, on the earth, and at some levels. And so this practice of reading the directions and receiving as well as giving, connecting, being a two-sided lemniscate, rather than the one-sided of I'm reaching out and connecting with you. Two other quick things. One is I have in my car, my Subaru finally just gave up the ghost, and I got a new car a couple of years ago. And one of my favorite features is that when I'm not consciously aware and present as I drive, the car tells me I need to take a break. And I think this is a great feature to build into cars. And I count on my colleagues and my friends to tell me that as well. And the last thing is that, many of you have asked for us to name people that we consider conscious leaders. And I find that a conundrum to do that, because as I said at the beginning today, it's a journey. And in one moment we're conscious, and in the next moment, dang, we've gone into reaction and we could no longer classify ourselves as conscious. And then the next moment we notice the reaction and we crawl our way back out of it, and we make it right, and we forgive and we apologize, and we don't have any idea how to not do that again. And we, go on from there. So I think in terms of conscious leaders as becoming social architects of a created future. So social architects of a created future, so that we're looking each day when we wake about what is my core commitment. You mentioned John Renish, Tom. I mean, John, I've known since the 80s and World Business Academy and Willis. John lived from a core commitment every day. And sometimes you liked the way he lived it, and sometimes you were like, really? And I think that's so true of all of us. But he took a stand, many stands, and he drew many of us into the stands that we and brought forward stands. So my prayer is that we all continue to act as pattern generators, really bringing the consciousness, structure, and behaviors into our earth, onto our earth, in our world, into our lives that do match our powerful commitments, that which we're called to do. Yeah. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Alan.
Thank you, Tom. I do appreciate, in some ways, where the conversation went, because I think we're being asked to model how do you talk about these issues that we face day to day. But and I appreciate the conundrum of, I don't tend to think of examples, but someone did come and felt like he should be here with us. That's Howard Thurman, African-American theologian, philosopher, mentor to Martin Luther King. And I kept thinking of a paradoxical statement he said, which is really a statement I bring forward for myself to reset myself. And he said, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do that, because the world needs people who come alive. And that has been sort of my reset point, because I am in the world and I care about the trajectory of the collective. But to return to myself is to always ask what makes me come alive, and to remember that that's what I'm also asking of others, because I do believe that's what the world needs.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Juliet, when we bring you into the conversation, I just want to acknowledge something Shawne put in the chat, that you were also in her book, and thank you for being a contributor to her publication.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to just express gratitude to all of you and to everyone who's listening. And I think we were in the belly of it today, and exemplifying leadership to be able to have these kinds of conversations. So thank you. In terms of practices, the metta meditation has helped me a lot in my life. And then going from that into more of an effortless awareness when I can, so that I can bring myself back to that place. But the person who I always say has been my greatest teacher in life is my brother John, who passed away on August 20th. He was since childhood, since infancy, brain injured. And when I would look into his eyes, it taught me that there's so much more than our skin. There's so, and there were moments when it was just so profound, so compelling, that there was such wisdom in those eyes, and compassion. It made me feel for people who, he could be violent sometimes too, you know. It made me feel for people even when they're violent. So I think that he was a good teacher, and there are many more. I have many mentors I'm very, very grateful for and to, including all of you and being here today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Juliet. And I just want to acknowledge, it's been shared in the chat, your brother was clearly a good teacher, because the energy in your presence on the screen, you don't have to say a word and it's noticed. So thank you.
For saying that.
Jim, I'll turn it over to you to close us out for today.
Before that, do you have any closing comments yourself, Tom?
I don't have anything I can contribute, Jim.
Well, just convening this group was a sufficient accomplishment. Well, thank you all. You know, I've been smiling since your comment, Karen, about you need to take a rest. And I would love someone to come up with an app where, when we're going off the rails, something comes on and tells us we need to take a pause. I think the world could use a really long pause to get all the elephants in the room in order. And you know, I was really struck, Heather, by this image which I had read about, and thank you for bringing it to our attention, about the elephants taking an evolutionary leap in one generation. Not through random selection, but through conscious intention as a survival mechanism. You know, and I think something like that is trying to emerge in humanity. You know, I can just feel it, that you know, and this notion of social architects for a created future is, I think, part of that evolutionary impulse, and we haven't pulled it off yet, but it's wanting to happen, you know. And we're, you know, Rilke's great line that the future speaks ruthlessly through us, and that's what changes the world. And the other only final comment I would make is an answer that I was ruminating on to your final question, Tom, about practice. It feels to me that in the research of Ilya Prigogine is something that all of us should be mindful of, that our coherence is related to the chaos. And with all the elephants in the room stampeding around, hitting each other in the walls and trampling people, which is our world, whatever we can do to cultivate coherence in our lives feels to me to be a number one priority. You know, 30, 40 years ago, if you meditated, it was sort of nice, marginal, and kind of new age. But I think meditation and the cultivation of coherence as a state of being is now a national security issue. I think it's an issue that all of us need to address very intentionally, because I think as the chaos accelerates, the centrifugal force is also going to accelerate. So all of us individually and in our communities have to be developing a compensatory capacity for increasing coherence that enables us simply to hold the chaos and navigate through it with some semblance of elegance. And I think, Shawne, you know, what made you choke up in your initial remarks, I think makes us all choke up. That in the midst of all this, we're little specks on a speck in the vastness of the cosmos, and we're alive in this little nanosecond. And then we're going to be gone. And what did we do with this time? And is it worth, as the Iliad says, is our life worth an echo against eternity? And I think that's where all of us are seeking in our journeys into conscious leadership to somehow understand and embody. And I just want to close by thanking all of you for being so conscious about leadership and so humble in the face of probably the most urgent imperative on the part of humankind. And that is, how do we at this moment become conscious enough to navigate a way forward, which is going to require real leadership to deliver ourselves and our precious planet and all the elephants and all the other species to the other side of this great divide. Because the one thing Prigogine says is that if the coherence becomes sufficiently coherent, it can enable the chaos to elevate to the next octave of coherence. And nothing short of that, I think, will suffice to remedy our current predicament. So, Tom, I want to thank you and Shawne very directly for bringing this group together, because I think it's the perfect conversation to have at this time. So once again, my friend, you're spot on.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I can't help myself. The app that you're looking for, it does exist already. It's called the human body. It reminds us when we need to rest. It reminds us when we need to take care of ourselves. And the coherence that you're speaking about is the coherence between our skull brain and our emotional brain.
Yeah.
And our intuitive brain. And if we can bring that coherence within ourselves, then all is right with the world.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tom. Thank you all. That brings us to a close. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat. You also received it in your Zoom reminder if you're watching this passively. And then we'll see you again on Monday, and we're going to have a full program again for 5 days on the challenges of artificial intelligence and how at this critical moment we can begin to develop compassionate, ethical artificial intelligence. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now. Have a good weekend.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.